Hi, I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett. Welcome to my channel. And today it's Astrology Star Sisters talking about Pluto stations retrograde in Aquarius for 2025. And my colleague, star sister, and friend, Madam Simon, is joining me. Hi, Simon. How's it going?
Pretty good, Liz. Better now
Oh,
that I'm here.
that's great. And we're going to talk about Pluto stationing retrograde, one of the outer planets. So, Madam Simon is an archetypal astrologer, tarot reader, and visionary artist, and her website is iconalchemy.com. I'm an astrologer, author, intuitive, numerologist, and tarotist, graduate of the Dwarf Planet University, and my website is alightpath.com, and we enjoy hearing from you. So, we're going to start out with the Pluto cycle. Pluto ingressed into Aquarius, and it's been dancing between Capricorn and Aquarius in 2023 and 2024. So the first ingress into Aquarius was May 23rd of 23, and then it retrograded back into Capricorn. Then it ingressed into Aquarius again on June 11th of 2023, and then it retrograded back and then touched back in Aquarius in January of 20 on January 20th of 24, then retrograded back, and then it went back into Aquarius on September 1st, 2024, and retrograded again, and then it finally ingressed for the last and final time to stay in Aquarius on November 19th of 2024. So it's been doing this dance. And so it's the first Pluto retrograde that will stay in the sign of Aquarius. And this retrograde is on May 4th at 3 degrees Aquarius and 49 minutes. Anything you'd like to add, Simon?
Well, no, it's been doing the back and forth between Capricorn and Aquarius, but now it is firmly in Aquarius. So this retrograde is going to be the first that is fully in Aquarius and fully dealing with Aquarian themes.
Okay, and do you want to talk about Aquarius for us?
Okay, well, it's a fixed sign, and the fixed modality is the middle of the season. It is the kind of the fullness of the element that it is in. And so it is good at holding the line, maintaining energy, enduring, resisting, can be stubborn because of that. Aquarius is traditionally ruled by Saturn, and Uranus is its modern or transcendental ruler for people who utilize that. Aquarius is of the air element. It is concerned with thought, communication. It is logical, oriented toward technology and towards systems. Its mantra is I know. Its keywords are theoretical, abstract, analytical, intelligent, dispassionate, visionary. It's concerned with the big picture. It's future oriented, and so therefore it can be utopian, scientific, also a bit eccentric and rebellious. And the caution is that it can be perceived as emotionless and perhaps a bit antisocial. It is can be dissociative and argumentative. Aquarians tend to be iconoclasts. They stand out from everyone around them.
And then Pluto is about hidden things and things below the surface. The modern ruler would be sign of Scorpio, and the traditional is Mars, which is Aries. Keywords are spiritual will, death and rebirth cycle, transmutation, all about power, our courage, survival, determination, and resilience. And the caution is being over controlling, oppressive, obsessive, compulsive, about desperation, hopelessness, betrayal, and the swamp. Would you like to add anything?
So with Pluto being considered, the modern or transcendental ruler of Scorpio, whose traditional ruler is Mars, we can see that there is kind of a relationship between Mars and Pluto, in the sense that Pluto can be considered the higher octave of Mars. It is, it's like the generational or group will, as opposed to the individual will that we see with Mars.
And we have a viewer that says, yes, definitely antisocial and disassociative. So I think that's with Aquarius.
Right. Depends on the Aquarian.
Exactly. So Pluto will station retrograde on May 4th of 2025 at 3 degrees Aquarius and 49 minutes at 8:28 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and we're using the astrology chart for Seattle. And here's the aspects that Pluto is making on its stationing retrograde, and you can go ahead and start, Simon.
Okay, well, there's two really big noticeable sort of sets of aspects. We've got the separating Mars-Pluto opposition from last weekend, with Mars in Leo. And thankfully, I mean, the great thing about Mars transits is that they tend to be less extreme on the separating side. But there may be still some tension in the air from that separating opposition. And that is forming a T-square with natural Black Moon Lilith, who's still pretty close to the Black Moon Lilith mean position as well, in Scorpio. And so that can, when we've got Lilith in aspect to both Mars and Pluto, that can amplify a sense of willfulness, a little bit of wildness and devil may care, but not in that kind of lighthearted sense, right? It's more deep and under the surface, maybe a little reckless. At the same time, these are fixed signs, and so it's not the kind of recklessness that we might see with a cardinal or mutable sign, which has a little bit more flexibility and movement to it. The fixed signs tend to want to stay in place a bit more. And so this, I feel like this is more, digging in our heels and refusing to behave.
And I want to make a comment that Lilith is retrograde because I forgot to add that on this slide. I'm sorry about that.
No worries. So there's that going on, but there's also this ongoing sextile that's been going on actually for a long time between Pluto and Neptune, where they kind of go in and out of orb of this sextile between them. But Venus happens to be conjoining Neptune at the same time. She's just separating now from her recent conjunction with Neptune. And so Venus can kind of soften things a bit. The thing about sextiles, though, is that we have to actively make the effort to lean into them. They're not as in our face as the oppositions and squares, right? The hard aspects force us to pay attention to them. Whereas a sextile is, we can easily take it for granted, which is unfortunate anytime we've got a benefic like Venus actually trying to make things a little less tense and hostile. And Venus with Neptune, of course, wants us to have perhaps a kinder vision. Neptune is all about the big vision. it asks us to look at things that aren't just the kind of the mundane way of looking at things, not just the practical world, but to see the bigger picture, to see the interconnectedness of life. Neptune in Aries, this is a recent development, and it's a big shift. All of the outer planets this year, or actually since this past November, are changing signs from earth and water signs to air and fire signs. And so that's a big shift from kind of a more yin or internal energy to a more yang and external active energy. And Venus, while she's said to be in her detriment in Aries, don't let that fool you. She's still trying to do Venusian things, right? But she is going to be more immediate in her desires, okay? And so when Venus is in Aries, we tend to have more of we're more oriented toward immediate gratification. We're a little less patient about things, but we're also more active in pursuing what we want. And the things that we take pleasure in are more active. So this is, a great time, for example, to go for a walk or do some physical activity that in turn helps you to meditate on or imagine things, to lean into daydreaming through activity that in turn can then give you inspiration for the other things that you want, okay, for the other things that you are aiming to do. In combination with Pluto, then, Pluto tends to add some oomph to whatever it touches, right? It can be regenerative. And so again, that's why I say this is a great time to do some sort of exercise that becomes meditative in and of itself, because Pluto's regenerative power can help that exercise to be more helpful than it is if we're just looking at the Mars interaction. Mars is great for activity, but if this was like Mars applying to Pluto while this was going on, I'd say, watch out for injury. Right.
Well, and that exercise could be like a Qigong or yoga or Tai Chi. It could be like if you have more energy and more flexibility, it could even be other martial arts.
Or going out dancing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This is a matter of having fun or enjoying that process of movement and tapping into the vision, the imagination, the metaphysical, the spiritual through that kind of active enjoyment.
Thank you. Okay. Now there's a whole lot of other aspects here, and I'll just let you start.
Okay. Let's see. So we've got this mystic rectangle that's been ongoing for a little bit. We've got the nodes with the South Node is sextile Juno. The North Node and Saturn and Ceres are all hanging out in Pisces, opposite that South Node, and sextile Aea and Uranus in Taurus. And so when we've got a mystic rectangle, we actually have two oppositions that are going on there, as well as these trines and sextiles. And so the oppositions give us some a little bit of tension, which can be motivating. And then the trines and sextiles help to give us support and some flow between that, so that yes, there's a bit of tension, there's a bit of friction, but it becomes something that we can make use of in order to achieve our goals, as opposed to feeling thwarted by that kind of energy. So that's really, that can be a very helpful configuration. We also have a mini or talent trine, what I look at as a minor grand trine, which is Jupiter in Gemini trine Pallas Athena in Aquarius, with both of them sextile Mercury and Chiron. And Mercury's applying to that conjunction with Chiron there in Aries, ruled by Mars, who's still separating from the opposition to Pluto. So again, there's a little bit of tension inherent in that Aries pairing with the Mercury Chiron conjunction that is gearing up, but it's getting this lovely support from both Jupiter and Pallas, who are in cahoots with each other. So what does that mean? Well, Mercury governs our thought and communication. Applying to Chiron, Chiron is continuing to show us where we have wounding, where we have struggles in the Aries archetype. And so it can show us where we feel like maybe we're not as competent as we would like to be, or maybe we feel weaker than we would like to. Or we struggle with showing our weakness. This can definitely be the, keeping a stiff upper lip to our own detriment, right? It can be things like toxic masculinity. It can be, this notion that we have to do everything alone, by ourselves, hyper independence, again, to our detriment. Chiron will show us those things. Now, how we make use of that knowledge, we can sit there and stew and feel wounded, hurt by this, and I don't want to share this and let anybody know about it. Or we can communicate about it with others who have been through similar experiences. And in the process, there is that wisdom that can be gained from seeing how we're not alone with these kinds of feelings. We don't have to isolate ourselves in order to, be all big and tough and oh, that makes us somehow more competent. No, it doesn't. Okay. The human condition is full of hurts. And acknowledging that can help us to learn from those things and share wisdom with each other about it. And with Jupiter in Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury, very communicative sign, but also, perhaps subject to a bit of information overload. There's been some of that going on. But Jupiter is still trying to be helpful here. And trine Pallas can help us to actually engage in good planning, good strategic thinking. Pallas sextile Chiron adds to the potential for learning from our situations, for gaining wisdom in the process of communication. And because Pallas is in Aquarius, that can help to use those lessons in a way that we apply to the bigger picture, especially helping on a more of a societal level. So it's great for using situations within our own experiences to help others within our community, that in turn has a ripple effect going outward.
Well, and I'd like to make a comment about the mystic rectangle, because you had mentioned the two oppositions. And to me, those opposition is becoming aware and of what is there. It's like a focal point. It's like becoming aware of that, so you know what to work on, and then you can work on the trines and the sextiles to because there is an amount of work to dig into that mystical rectangle to gain the wisdom or the gift from that, the magic from that mystic rectangle.
Right. And that mystic rectangle, since it involves Aia, also has some overtones pertaining to healing, but specifically healing through change, since it's Aia with Uranus, right? And Saturn's involved, so it also can relate to wisdom, and patience and working through our limitations. And then, with Juno and Ceres involved there also is that element of, working within the social contract. Now, Juno's still retrograde, so she's reconsidering, how have we structured things in our society, and is that the way that we want to? And she's looking at it through an emotional lens, through, the deep feelings of Scorpio. And then with Ceres in Pisces, there is that element of who is hurting, who is hungry, who needs feeding, who needs nurturing, who needs care. So I really think that this combination of these two configurations is oriented toward recognizing that our individual struggles are connected with the group, connected with the community, and that we don't have to suffer alone. And I think that this is a really important backdrop for Pluto retrograde. Pluto has been in Aquarius, dredging up what is ripe for transformation within our social order, within our social structures, our social systems, whether that's technological systems, systems of information, systems of organization. Okay. And now stationing retrograde is going to be reconsidering what has been dredged up. Now that can go, Liz and I we talked about this earlier, off camera. This is something where Pluto, among other things, deals with plutocracy, with, government by the rich. Okay. Deals with the concerns of the wealthy. And so it's interesting to see just how this retrograde is going to go, because we've been seeing areas that are ripe for transformation when it comes to how our systems favor the wealthy. And when we have a retrograde, then we have a time of reconsidering whatever the planet in question has brought up. Okay. Well, now there is that reconsidering, and maybe that favors looking more deeply into some of the things, the questions that have been raised about our society and our systems and the role of the wealthy within them, since November. But that doesn't automatically mean that, like, things are going to suddenly go in a different direction. Pluto, among other things, can relate to revolution, but revolution comes from revolve, which means it can sometimes go right back to where it started. So it isn't automatically change. So this is going to be interesting to see. We're backtracking through these early degrees of Aquarius and reviewing what we have learned thus far. But Pluto's going to be in Aquarius for 20 years, right?
Exactly. So we have time to figure it out.
Right.
Okay, so some other aspects are several T-squares. I mean, this is like pretty interesting, and we already spoke of the one T-square with the Pluto opposite Mars and to Lilith.
Yeah.
So we can, you can go ahead and start talking to the other ones if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. So we've got the moon at the time of the actual station, the exact station, is in a T-square with the sun and Vesta. Vesta in Scorpio, retrograde, and the sun in Taurus. And so again, that's more of that fixed energy. It's more that kind of, digging in our heels. It's applying to an opposition with Pallas, actually. So there is kind of some of that stickiness and stubbornness that I am seeing here with so many T-squares, but especially with so much fixed energy. And Vesta, relates to our focus. Where is our attention at the moment? And, here Vesta is, like Juno, is in Scorpio, in this space of deep emotion, of hidden undercurrents, power dynamics that are underneath the surface of things. And Vesta is then reconsidering that. Vesta, of course, also relates to hearth and home. But being the Roman goddess, I relate Vesta here to the hearth and home of the empire, as opposed to the hearth and home that is more personal. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't a personal element to this. Like I said, Vesta can be our focus. Vesta is also the sacred spark, the sacred flame, right? And so can relate to what is it that keeps us going, okay? And in this case is reviewing the deep feelings that are part of what can keep us going. Now, when we're looking at Scorpio, those can be feelings of determination. Those feelings can be a bit ruthless. Those feelings can have the attitude of the ends justify the means, right? And when that is part of this T-square with the sun is opposing Vesta. So the sun is looking at that like, oh, you're feeling ruthless, huh? What are going to be the consequences of that? What's the long-term impact on that, on our sense of stability, on our survival needs, on our ability to live a comfortable life as a result of that ruthlessness and that drive, right? And then the moon at the release point of that T-square is in Leo, which is ruled by the sun. And the moon is our instincts and our knee-jerk reactions, which in Leo want to be expressive. So, we want to talk about it or do art about it, or, we want to bring attention to it, to shine in some way relevant that is related to it. But when you're bringing light onto things that are a little intense, a little maybe even Machiavellian or underhanded, now that can potentially cause a ruckus. So that is a possibility there, but it is also great energy for focusing on projects that we feel really deeply about. It's a great time for doing creative work, and a great time for considering, what is going to make us shine and stand out, preferably without dredging up our worst qualities, right? We also see here that Jupiter is, so Jupiter's applying to this square with the lunar nodes, with Saturn and Ceres hanging out with the North Node. And this is actually an ongoing signature for a while. Jupiter, let's see, the square from Jupiter to the nodes perfects on, I believe it's May 18th. And then Jupiter will still be applying to the square with Saturn that I believe does not perfect until they have both switched signs. And so we're looking at several weeks of this energy, where, and this is the third of the Jupiter-Saturn squares. The first was the day of the Democratic National Convention back in August of 2024. The second was in December of 2024. And this is the final one. Okay. And when we're looking at, Jupiter and Saturn are the social planets. They can both relate to authority. They can both relate to government and structure. Well, Saturn more structure, and Jupiter the more philosophical, expansive point of view. Jupiter can relate to law. Okay. And so when these are in this, at a 90-degree angle to each other, there is this tension between them. They both want their points of view to be seen and heard, but they're having trouble getting along about it. And so Saturn is the more restrictive side of our systems and our structures. Okay. And Jupiter is, the more hopeful and optimistic and enthusiastic side. While Jupiter is a benefic and is trying to do good things, Jupiter also tends to make whatever he touches bigger. And if he's touching Saturn, then he can make Saturn stuff bigger. It should be noted that they conjoined in 2020 during the early days of the pandemic. And so there is that, well, actually, I think their actual conjunction was later. Now that I think about it, it was in December. Wasn't it December of 2020? Yeah, that's right. So not so early. It was like after it had been going for a little bit. They conjoined at 0 degrees of Aquarius, as I recall. Yes, that was that was a big old reset. So I find that interesting that we're seeing them in a hard aspect again now with Pluto in the early degrees of Aquarius. And Saturn is due for another big old conjunction with another planet, Neptune, at the beginning of Aries, another big old reset. So we've got a lot of this kind of, big changes are afoot energy going on with both the social planets and the outer planets. And that energy is going to be going on for much of this year, with the final big conjunction of Saturn and Neptune next February at 0 degrees Aries, right? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So this Jupiter-Saturn square that we're moving into, and now we're feeling the beginnings of it here with this Pluto station retrograde. That's, this big signature that we need to be paying attention to of, Jupiter wants to bring us opportunities. Saturn wants to remind us of reality. Okay. And so finding the way to balance the needs of, what are the realities in our lives that we're working with versus what are the opportunities that we are trying to make real, that we are trying to make good use of. And are we actually making good use of them, right? Because Saturn can dredge up our fears and our insecurities, okay? We can get all caught up in that to the point that we miss where is the opportunity, okay? So this is definitely a time to pay attention to where are silver linings if you're experiencing hardships. Where are there places where you need to pay attention to some challenging realities in order to make what you are hoping for more likely to happen? Working with probability. If you're going to have pie in the sky ideas, that's great, but you need to, at some point in time, bring them back down to earth in order to make them possible, right? And so that's the balancing act that we're being called upon to engage in here. And noting that Ceres is hanging out there with the North Node and Saturn, there is this fatefulness anytime that we're dealing with the nodes, okay? But with Jupiter squaring the nodes, it can feel as though optimism is perhaps deviating from the path, right? Saturn up there at the North Node can make it feel like, our fate, our destiny, the way things are going is, it is guaranteed to be challenging, or at the very least serious. And, that's always possible. It's always possible. But when Jupiter is there at the bendings of the nodes like that, that also asks us to really pay attention to our hopes, our dreams, the opportunities, the good fortune that we would like to see. Because sometimes when something is a distraction, it's actually because it's a necessary thing to be addressed before we can proceed. When we set our plans or when we put ourselves on this trajectory, we did not fully consider something that now we have to look at if we're actually going to make real progress. And so this is not a time to deny hope. This is a time to lean into how do we make it more real? Okay. How do we make that hope actually grounded and practical and capable? And then finally, we've got Pallas Athena, who is squaring Juno in Scorpio, and also is squaring Aya and Uranus in Taurus. And Pallas is, Pallas Athena is a goddess of wisdom, but also a goddess of warfare. Okay. So therefore, concerned with what are the tactics that we use in order to deal with conflict. How do we make plans to address sticky situations? Okay. Aya conjoining Uranus definitely suggests that if we are reacting poorly to change, that can have an impact on our health. If we're being overly stubborn, that can have an impact on our health. I do feel like this combination can add to nerves and anxiety for people who are prone to that. And so that requires some extra self-care in order to address those kinds of challenges. At the same time, there's also the recognition that we need to make changes in order to make it possible for us to have the health that we desire. Okay, that change is necessary. And that change is strongly tied to this reconsidering of the social contract. What are our institutions up to? Do we like it? If we don't like it, what are we willing to do in order to affect the changes that we desire? And what's our own level of responsibility and commitment involved? It's all well and good to gripe about what's going on in society, but if we're not willing to step up and lend a hand, that's on us if we don't like the results, right? And so anytime we see Juno involved, there is that question of, what are you willing to commit to? And at the same time, where are you now saying, hey, I didn't commit to this. This is not something I agreed to. And I'm not willing to be part of something I did not agree to. And so there can be a, removing oneself from certain relationships when we're looking at Juno retrograde, or at least reconsidering their parameters, renegotiating their parameters. Anyway, that opposing that Uranus combination suggests to me that there can be some big anxieties that get dredged up. And so that requires then that we exercise some patience, some planning, some willingness to think strategically, recognizing we can't necessarily snap our fingers and make things the way that we want them to be, right? And so we have to do that slow, steady, patient work over time in order to make the real lasting changes that we desire.
And with all these T-squares, it's asking us to make adjustments and changes. And, we have 4 T-squares. That's a lot for one chart. A lot.
Yeah.
And then, so it's like, I would agree with Simon, be patient, do good self-care, time to start exercising if you aren't, or just move around a little bit more.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'd like to say, 3 of the 4 T-squares are ruled by Pluto, and that's Lilith, Vesta, and Juno. And all of them are retrograde, so they're reconsidering and reevaluating a whole lot of stuff.
Right.
Then Uranus is, so I'm going to back up. Lilith, Vesta, and Juno are answering to Pluto, basically.
Yeah.
And then Uranus is ruling that Pallas Athena and Pluto. So Pluto and Pallas Athena are answering to Uranus, which again wants change. So, some people do not like change. Some people resist change. And as much as you can, go with the flow is what my recommendation is. Because changes and adjustments, we're being asked to make those big time.
Well, and even if you don't use Uranus, as the modern ruler of Aquarius, and you go with the traditional Saturn, like I do, Uranus and Saturn are currently sextile each other. They're in cahoots, right? And so therefore, there is this dynamic between, change needs to happen, but don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Okay. And again, both Pluto and Pallas are answering to that. Both Pluto and Pallas are in that mode of the dynamic between structure and change, between, what has been and what will be, right? Past and future. And we can't just look to the future without paying attention to what has happened in the past, to what have been the foundations that have been previously laid, right? It's all well and good to say, there's the whole thing is kind of a mess, let's burn it all down. Okay. That doesn't actually really help, because when we have a society as large as human society has become, there are all kinds of things attached to the things that we may want to change. And that's some of, actually, I think, what has been being discovered during, the first portion of this year that we have been living through, is that there are folks wanting to make some great big changes, but oh, look, they're attached to things. And other things get changed too without us intending those things to be changed. And so I think that may also be part of this particular Pluto retrograde, in terms of what we're looking at, because among other things, Pluto can deal with complexity. And
one change might not change it all. So it might take 4 or 5 adjustments. It's like, oh, this sounds like a good idea, but like you say, it didn't work out quite exactly how you want, and now there's consequences, and now we need to tweak it or change it a little bit more. And so it could take several tries to get it where it actually works well.
Right. And there are also power dynamics to be considered here. And in particular, what are the consequences to the people, which Aquarius is very concerned with the people, what are the needs of society as a whole? And Aquarius, even if it can be said to be, detached or dispassionate or whatever, it still has this ideal of, it wants to be doing what is good for humanity as a whole. Okay. And when we see uneven power dynamics and ugly consequences to things getting changed in ways that, maybe we hadn't considered. Oh, this is attached to that, right? I think that this retrograde can be asking us to pay attention to what are the actual power dynamics that are going on. What are the actual consequences and other threads that things are attached to. So, for example, Pluto in Aquarius has been very much tied to AI, the rise of AI. And it's all well and good to say, oh, we've got this technology and it does all these exciting things. Oh, but wait, when we advertise, I mean, literally, I'm driving on a highway in Seattle and I see a billboard that says something to the effect of, don't hire any more employees because AI is here, right? It's like, oh, great. So what are those people going to go and do for work now? Right? And, what will be the consequences of replacing your employees with AI? Okay.
Exactly.
There could be a lot of unintended consequences, or perhaps, on the other hand, intended, but not good for humanity. So I think that this retrograde is going to be doing, on the societal level at least, is going to be reconsidering stuff. And a planet in retrograde tends to behave... On one hand, it can behave differently from how it normally does, but on the other hand, it tends to be closer to Earth when it is retrograde, and so its themes actually tend to be emphasized. So it's like itself, but it's not like itself. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we have a couple of other Configurations here. We have a yod or finger of God and a Thor's hammer. So start where you would like to.
Okay. So the yod, it's a very brief one. Oh, no, sorry. The Taurus hammer is a very brief one because it's what's involved with the moon. I'm like, which thing is which? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, the Thor's hammer is in red, and the yod or finger of God is in green and blue.
Right. Okay. So yes, so that Taurus hammer, it's fleeting because the moon is involved. So we're only looking at something that's lasting a few hours. That said, of course, whatever aspects are going on in a chart at the time of the station retrograde can still be said to kind of flavor that retrograde, right? Just like an ingress chart. Okay. So yeah. That Taurus hammer puts pressure on our ability to be serious and dedicated and responsible and self-disciplined. That pressure is coming from the moon and Vesta. So it's coming from our instincts and our focus. Okay. So, for example, we may have something that we're focused on, we're trying to achieve, but there's some tension between that and what our impulses are, or what our emotions are. And those in turn are putting pressure on us to act responsibly and, be patient and persevere through difficulties. And at the same time to pay attention to what is it that is actually nourishing to us or nurturing to us. And when I say us here, because this is in Pisces, it is not simply us as individuals, it is us in connection with the web of life, in connection with humanity as a whole and the planet as a whole. And so there can be a bit of a sense of fatefulness there. Like I said, it is a short-term configuration. The yod is something that lasts a little bit longer. That is, this sextile that's going on between Juno and the South Node that's been going on for at least a week or two. Those are quincunx Chiron. Chiron, we don't see it here, but Chiron is, I think, within a degree of Eris. And Eris is disruptive and a bit rebellious. And so, in combination with Chiron, like I said before, Chiron can reveal our wounding and the lessons we learn through where we feel hurt or inadequate or not up to the task. But I think, in combination with Eris there is something a bit rebellious and disruptive there. And, we may have a little bit of personal unruliness in reaction to the ongoing reconsideration of the social contract and our relationships and, the fabric of society and what are our deep feelings about it and what are all the machinations going on under the surface about it. And Juno sextile the South Node has been really encouraging us to let go of the need to be perfect about things, to let go of, shall we say, immaculate organization, to let go of necessarily logical or rational problem solving or practical problem solving. It doesn't mean we can't do those things. We may be able to, but we may need to lean into other methods of doing things at this time. And be willing to, I mean, obviously with the North Node in Pisces, we have to embrace more of that. Okay, there is a flow to things. How do I get into that? The solution to certain problems may not be as logical on the surface. It may not be as orderly as what I'm used to. Okay. So those are all things that we see with that North Node in Pisces, right? But with this Yod, it puts pressure on where we feel wounded and not up to our desired competence in relation to those things. And that suggests that we have to be able to address those feelings and address our struggles when it comes to our ability to act. You know, for a lot of people in the face of big changes, big social changes, there can be these feelings of helplessness. Okay. Which goes back to our Pluto stationing retrograde, because Pluto can dredge up feelings of helplessness, as anyone who has lived through hard Pluto transits can tell. Hi, Liz. I know we both have. You know, so anytime we deal with big Pluto transits, we do have to face those kinds of feelings, right? And so Chiron in Aries, another a sign traditionally ruled by Mars, who's concerned with action, right? Forces us to look at where do we feel like we don't know how to take the right action. Okay. And sometimes it is really necessary to admit what we don't know how to do before we can have any chance of figuring out how to do.
Exactly. Right? So when Pluto stations retrograde, and Pluto's about below the surface, I'm going to say that the Earth could be active with volcanoes, and it has been a little more active lately. And off the Pacific Northwest, out in the ocean, there's underwater volcano they're expecting to erupt at any time, basically, because I've seen several reports on that. So I would kind of, as a little prediction with that, I would say that, the Earth is going to be a little active, and some things below the surface may be happening. And there's some volcanoes, like the volcano in Hawaii has been very active for probably the last 6 months, and I think there's other ones too. Is there anything else? Because we're going to kind of conclude with the Pluto retrograde, and then we'll briefly touch on Pluto stationing direct. Do you want to say anything to the audience about Pluto retrograde, or you think you've covered it all?
I think I've covered an awful lot, although I do want to mention, in connection with what you just mentioned, that, yeah, I've been noticing a lot of seismic activity. For some reason, I've been getting more pings about that lately. So, yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to go on to when Pluto stations direct, and we're just going to touch on this briefly because we'll be back in October to talk more about this. But on October 13th, Pluto stations direct at 1 degree Aquarius in 22 minutes. And then there's quite a few aspects here. We have Pluto will be conjunct Pallas Athena. Pluto will be opposite the Moon and Jupiter. And Pluto will be trine Venus and Uranus, and sextile to Neptune and Juno. And we have a grand trine here, 2 kites, and a mystic rectangle. Do you want to say anything about this?
Oh, it's just a whole lot going on. I do think it is interesting to note that the opposition, it's a loose opposition, but it is there, to the Moon and Jupiter. The Moon there is domiciled while Jupiter is in exaltation in Cancer. So that's a much more happy and empowered Moon and Jupiter combination. So, I mean, yes, any opposition of the moon to Pluto can feel a little intense. And conjunct Jupiter can feel big, intense, but that can be because we've got the moon domiciled, and because Jupiter is exalted, I would expect some of that intensity of feeling to actually be empowering rather than disempowering. One of the benefits of Pluto interactions is that they can lead to they can be connected to a regenerative quality. And so, yes, Pluto dredges up all kinds of difficult stuff and can be quite a bear to live through, Plutonian stuff, but it can also be empowering. It can also be regenerative. It can also bring us back up from the depths, right? And
Yes.
so I think that is a strong potential here, especially when we've got this grand air trine that we see here. That is, since it involves Venus, that's more kindly, and it's a domiciled Venus, right? She's in her own sign of Libra. And yeah, I feel like that grand air trine has the potential for some very positive communication going on during this. And then, of course, having a mystic rectangle. We like those. We've already expressed how much we like those. And two kites. I mean, yeah, I actually feel like this is a really nice chart for the direct Pluto.
Well, and I would say Pluto conjunct. Now, this is a time chart. So in Seattle, Pluto's conjunct the midheaven, but it's also conjunct Pallas Athena. So through that reevaluation period of Pluto retrograde, we've probably been strategizing and working on some new plans and gain some wisdom through that retrograde.
Yeah. And I think that shows with all the other stuff going on in the chart.
Right. And then we're going to go to the other aspects. We have a couple T-squares, and we already talked about how, they're asking for adjustments and changes, but now we have 2 instead of 4, so that feels a little bit more comfortable. Is there anything that you want to speak to this one? Because we will be coming back in October and talking.
Yeah, we will. I do feel like, the T-square that involves Jupiter and the moon there, with the sun opposing Chiron and Eris. The sun opposite that Chiron and Eris again speaks to uncovering the things that hurt, uncovering the things that have tripped us up. Eris, it relates to discord. It is a warrior goddess who likes to kind of stir the pot, right? But also is, dislikes hypocrisy, likes to point out when people are being, stuffed shirts and full of themselves and all of that. And so I feel like there is this, there's some sting, but it's kind of necessary. And with that T-square to Jupiter and the moon, then there's, the need to cry it out, the need to feel through things, but also to generate hope as a result of our willingness to feel things. And like I said before, Chiron and Aries can, kind of be, I don't have weaknesses. I don't feel this stuff. Well, during that T-square, you're going to feel it. You might as well admit it, right?
Address it. Yeah. Make some changes in a positive way.
Yeah. And then that Vesta square the nodes, I think, it definitely relates to, what are you focused on? What do you hold sacred? What is important to you? Are you actually elevating that, or are you just giving it lip service? And that's on, both the personal and the societal level. And as I said before, with, Jupiter square the nodes, just because something is a distraction from your path does not mean it does not need to be addressed, right? So I
Exactly.
think this Pluto direct is going to be is going to ask us to address that in order to be able to move forward on our path.
Exactly. And in our audience, we have a Kim that says hello, and I want to say welcome to our
Hello,
show,
Kim.
and I hope you're enjoying it. So, Simon, I want to thank you for joining me today and talking about Pluto retrograde. I want to thank our audience that's been here live for watching, and all those that come back and watch at a later date. And then I'm going to let you talk about your slide.
Okay. So I can be found on Patreon, where I write about astrological transits, and I offer custom astrological art for my patrons. And like Liz, I am a consulting astrologer. And so, therefore, if you wish to schedule a consultation with me, you can visit my website at iconalchemy.com.
Yes, and as Simon mentioned, we're both give consultations. We both have newsletters and YouTube channels, so we appreciate you making appointments with us or subscribing to our channels. Other shows that I do is the Cosmic Connections with about relationship astrology, magical astrology, midpoints in astrology. Justin and I do the astrology forecast and full moon forecast each month, and from time to time the Chiron asteroid series. The Astrology Star Sisters cover Chinese astrology, decans using astrology and tarot, dwarf planets, fixed stars, planet stationing, Uranian astrology, and the Venus star point. I will be on Talk Cosmos on May 25th, talking about the new moon in Gemini, the core connections to transform. You can watch it live here on my channel. Again, to get a hold of Simon, it's iconalchemy.com. And my website is alightpath.com. And I want to thank all those that have joined today, and those that come back and watch later, and with us today. And we're going to sign off here in a moment, and we're going to say goodbye for now. Thanks for joining me, Simon.
Thank you for having me, Liz.